The sun beat down on Dust Devil Gulch, baking the dusty streets and the clapboard houses a uniform shade of brown. Sarah squinted, pushing a stray strand of hair from her face as she carried a bucket of water from the well. Life wasn't easy, but it was hers. Her days were filled with chores, tending the small garden, mending clothes, and helping her pa with odd jobs around their little homestead on the edge of town. Sarah wasn't beautiful in the way folks in dime novels described. Her hands were calloused, her face tanned from the sun, but her eyes held a spark of kindness that shone brighter than any jewel. It was that kindness that led her to the creek one sweltering afternoon. She'd been gathering wildflowers for her ma's grave when she heard a groan. Hidden amongst the rocks and scrub brush, she found him, a man, young but weathered, with a bullet wound in his side. He wore dusty, worn clothes and a bandana that barely concealed a face hardened by hardship. He was clearly an outlaw, but Sarah didn't see a criminal. She saw a person in need. Fear warred with compassion. The sensible thing would be to run, to alert the sheriff. But something in his pain-filled eyes stopped her. He looked so utterly alone. Cautiously, she approached him. Are you all right? She whispered, though the answer was obvious. He flinched, his hand instinctively moving towards a gun holstered at his hip. Stay back, he rasped, his voice rough. Sarah froze, but didn't run. I just want to help, she said, holding up her hands to show she meant no harm. I won't tell anyone you're here. He studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. After a long, tense moment, he seemed to relax slightly. Water, he croaked. Sarah knelt beside him, carefully helping him to drink from her water skin. Over the next few days, she secretly tended to his wound, bringing him food and fresh water, always under the cover of darkness. She knew the risks she was taking. Helping an outlaw was a serious offense, but she couldn't bring herself to abandon him. He told her his name was Cole. He didn't say much about his past, but she gathered he'd lived a hard life, one filled with violence and betrayal. But when he looked at her, Sarah saw a flicker of something else, a hint of vulnerability, a longing for something better. As Cole healed, a quiet bond formed between them. He admired her courage and her unwavering compassion. She saw beyond his outlaw exterior to the wounded soul beneath. She never asked him what he had done. She didn't care. One night, as the moon hung high in the sky, Cole knew he had to leave. He was strong enough to travel, and staying any longer would only put Sarah in danger. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice low. You saved my life. Sarah simply smiled. Just be careful, she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Sarah alone with the memory of his gaze and the faint hope that their paths might cross again someday. Weeks turned into months after Cole's departure. Sarah continued her life, the memory of the outlaw a bittersweet ache in her heart. Dust Devil Gulch remained a quiet, unremarkable town until Jebediah Stone rode in. Jebediah was a mountain of a man, with a face like granite and eyes that held no warmth. He arrived with a small group of rough-looking men, their horses kicking up dust as they thundered down Main Street. Jebediah dismounted in front of the saloon, his spurs clinking menacingly on the wooden porch. He was dressed in expensive but gaudy clothes, and the gold tooth that glinted when he spoke did little to improve his appearance. He was looking for a wife. He didn't ask. He demanded. He strode into the saloon, scattering the patrons like pigeons, and announced his intentions in a voice that boomed through the room. He needed a woman, he declared, to cook, clean, and warm his bed. He offered no love, no companionship, only a promise of security, and a threat of what would happen if his demands were not met. Fear gripped Dust Devil Gulch. The town didn't have much in the way of law enforcement. The sheriff was an old, slow man, more accustomed to settling disputes over stray cattle than facing down a dangerous man like Jebediah Stone. The townsfolk huddled together, whispering amongst themselves. No one wanted to volunteer their daughter, their sister, or their wife. But they knew that Jebediah wouldn't take no for an answer. Sarah's father, a hard-working but frail man, felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that Sarah was the most likely target. She was young, strong, and known for her kindness. Jebediah would see her as a good worker, someone who wouldn't cause trouble. He tried to reason with Jebediah to explain that Sarah was needed at home, that she was too young to be married. But Jebediah wouldn't listen. He simply smiled, a cruel, chilling smile, and said that he would give them a week to consider his offer. If no one volunteered, he would simply choose a woman himself. The week passed in a haze of fear and anxiety. Sarah saw the worry etched on her father's face, the fear in the eyes of her neighbors. She knew what she had to do. On the seventh day, as Jebediah and his men rode into town, Sarah stepped forward. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her voice was steady as she spoke. "I'll marry you, Mr. Stone," she said, her eyes fixed on his. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Her father cried out, but Sarah silenced him with a look. She was doing this to protect him, to protect her community. Jebediah's granite face cracked into a smile. "Well now," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "That's mighty generous of you, girl." Sarah knew that she had just made a deal with the devil, but she also knew that she had done what she had to do. As Jebediah Stone led her away, Sarah looked back at her father, her eyes filled with a silent promise. She would survive this. She would find a way to protect herself. And maybe, just maybe, someday she would be free. Life with Jebediah was a living nightmare. The grand house he owned on the outskirts of town wasn't a home, but a gilded cage. The fancy furniture and expensive rugs couldn't hide the coldness that permeated every room. Jebediah treated Sarah not as a wife, but as property. Her days were filled with endless chores. She cooked elaborate meals that he barely touched, cleaned rooms that he carelessly dirted, and tended to his every whim, no matter how unreasonable. He demanded absolute obedience and punished even the smallest infraction with a cruel word or a stinging blow. The other women in town, initially relieved that they weren't chosen, now looked at Sarah with a mixture of pity and fear. They avoided her, not wanting to incur Jebediah's wrath by associating with her. Sarah was utterly alone. Jebediah's men were no better. They leered at her, made crude jokes, and treated her with a disrespect that made her skin crawl. Jebediah did nothing to stop them, often joining in their mockery. At night, the abuse was worse. Jebediah forced himself on Sarah, ignoring her tears and her pleas. She felt like a broken doll, used and discarded. Her spirit, once so bright, began to dim. She tried to find solace in small things. She would sneak out to the garden, tending to the few flowers that managed to survive in the harsh climate. She would read the tattered books she had managed to bring with her, losing herself in stories of brave heroines and happy endings. But even these small joys were tinged with sadness, reminders of the life she had lost. One evening, as she was cleaning the fireplace, she found a small, wooden carving hidden beneath a pile of ashes. It was a bird, crudely made, but full of life. She recognized it instantly. It was one she had carved as a child for her ma. Her ma had treasured that little bird. Jebediah must have found it amongst her belongings and tossed it into the fire. A wave of anger washed over Sarah, stronger than anything she had felt before. He wasn't just breaking her body. He was trying to break her spirit, to erase her past. But she wouldn't let him. She clutched the little bird in her hand, its rough edges digging into her skin. She would survive this. She would find a way to reclaim her life. She started to observe Jebediah, to learn his habits, his weaknesses. She noticed how much he drank, how easily he was angered, how dependent he was on his men. She knew that she couldn't overpower him physically, but maybe, just maybe, she could outsmart him. She began to subtly defy him, to push back against his control. She would accidentally burn his dinner, forget to polish his boots, misunderstand his orders. These small acts of rebellion were dangerous, but they gave her a sense of power, a flicker of hope in the darkness. Jebediah noticed her defiance, of course. He punished her, but Sarah refused to break. She met his anger with a quiet defiance, a steely glint in her eyes that he couldn't quite extinguish. He realized that he hadn't broken her completely. There was still a spark of resistance within her, a spark that he found both infuriating and strangely intriguing. He knew that he had to crush it, or risk losing control altogether. Sarah knew that she was playing a dangerous game, but she had nothing left to lose. She would fight for her survival, for her freedom, until her last breath. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to escape Jebediah's clutches and reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. Far from Dust Devil Gulch, Cole rode. The bullet wound had healed, leaving a jagged scar on his side, a constant reminder of Sarah's kindness. He'd returned to his old life, the life of an outlaw, but something had changed. The violence felt hollow. The camaraderie of his gang felt forced. He couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face, her gentle smile, her unwavering compassion. He tried to forget her, to bury the memory of her beneath layers of whiskey and gunsmoke. But it was no use. She haunted his dreams, a beacon of light in the darkness of his past. He knew he owed her something, but he didn't know what. One night, sitting around a campfire with his gang, he overheard a conversation. They were talking about a town called Dust Devil Gulch, a town ruled by a brutal man named Jebediah Stone. They spoke of the fear that gripped the town, the way Jebediah had forced a young woman to marry him. Cole's blood ran cold. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the woman they were talking about was Sarah. He didn't say anything to the gang. He knew they wouldn't understand. They would probably laugh at him, call him soft. But he couldn't ignore what he had heard. He had to go back. He left the gang that night, slipping away into the darkness. He didn't take anything with him, just his horse, his gun, and the burning determination in his heart. He rode for days, pushing his horse to the limit, driven by a single thought. He had to save Sarah. As he neared Dust Devil Gulch, he slowed his pace. He knew he couldn't just ride in guns blazing. He needed information. He needed a plan. He stopped at a small trading post a few miles outside of town. The owner, an old, grizzled man with a suspicious eye, eyed him warily. "Looking for something, stranger?" the man asked, his hand resting on the shotgun beneath the counter. "Information," Cole said, his voice low. "About Jebediah Stone." The man's eyes narrowed. "That's a dangerous man to be asking about," he said. "I know," Cole replied, "but I need to know what he's been up to." The man hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "He's been running this town into the ground," he said, "taxing folks into poverty, bullying anyone who stands up to him. And that poor girl he married, they say he treats her like dirt." Cole's fist clenched. "What's she like?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Sarah? She's a good woman," the man said, his voice softening. "Kind, strong. She doesn't deserve what's happening to her." Cole nodded. He already knew that. He asked the man more questions, gathering as much information as he could about Jebediah's habits, his men, his weaknesses. He knew that rescuing Sarah wouldn't be easy. Jebediah was a powerful man with a lot of resources. But Cole was determined. He owed Sarah his life, and he wouldn't rest until she was safe. He began to formulate a plan, knowing he couldn't do this alone. He would need help, and he knew just where to find it. The gears of his past were turning again, but this time it was for a righteous cause. This time it was for Sarah. Cole knew he couldn't face Jebediah alone. He needed allies, people he could trust, people who were willing to risk their lives for Sarah. He remembered a few faces from his past, faces that weren't entirely tarnished by the outlaw life. First, there was Two Feathers, a Native American scout. Cole had crossed paths with him years ago during a botched train robbery. Two Feathers had saved Cole's life, guiding him through the desert after he'd been separated from his gang. Two Feathers was a skilled tracker, a master of disguise, and fiercely loyal to those he considered friends. Cole knew that finding him wouldn't be easy, but he knew the general area where Two Feathers' tribe roamed. It took him several days, following faint trails and asking discreet questions at remote settlements. But finally, he found him. Two Feathers was wary at first. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. But when Cole spoke his name and reminded him of their shared past, a flicker of recognition appeared in his eyes. "Cole," Two Feathers said, his voice low and gravelly. "It has been many seasons. Cole explained the situation, telling Two Feathers about Sarah, about Jebediah Stone, and about his plan to rescue her. Two Feathers listened intently, his expression unreadable. "This is a dangerous path you walk," Two Feathers said finally. "Jebediah Stone is a powerful man. He has many guns." "I know," Cole replied, "but Sarah is worth the risk. She saved my life, and I won't let her suffer." Two Feathers studied Cole's face, searching for any sign of deceit. He saw only determination, a fierce protectiveness that mirrored his own loyalty to his tribe. "I will help you," Two Feathers said, "but we will need more than just our own strength." Cole nodded. He already had someone else in mind, a man named Silas, a former member of Jebediah's gang. Silas had a conscience, something that was rare among Jebediah's men. He had left the gang a few months ago, disgusted by Jebediah's cruelty. Cole had heard rumors that Silas was hiding out in a small town to the south. Finding Silas was easier than finding Two Feathers. He was working as a blacksmith, trying to make an honest living. He was surprised to see Cole, his face a mixture of fear and apprehension. "What do you want, Cole?" Silas asked, his hand instinctively moving towards a hammer at his side. Cole explained his plan, just as he had with Two Feathers. Silas listened, his expression growing more and more troubled. "I don't know, Cole," Silas said. "Jebediah is a dangerous man. If he finds out I'm helping you—" "I know the risks," Cole interrupted. "But Sarah needs our help. You saw how he treated her, Silas. You know it's not right." Silas hesitated, his conscience warring with his fear. He had witnessed Jebediah's cruelty firsthand. He had seen the pain in Sarah's eyes. He knew that he couldn't stand idly by while she suffered. "All right," Silas said finally. "I'll help you. But I want you to know, I'm doing this for Sarah, not for you." Cole nodded. He didn't care about Silas's motives. All that mattered was that he was willing to fight. With Two Feathers and Silas by his side, Cole felt a glimmer of hope. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned. But they had something that Jebediah Stone didn't have, a cause worth fighting for. And they were ready to risk everything to save Sarah. The ride to Jebediah's ranch was tense. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the dry earth and turning the air thick and heavy. Two Feathers rode silently, his eyes scanning the horizon, alert to any sign of danger. Silas fidgeted nervously, constantly checking his gun, his face pale with apprehension. Cole remained stoic, his gaze fixed on the distant silhouette of Jebediah's ranch. He knew that this was it. There was no turning back. He had come too far, risked too much. He had to save Sarah. As they approached the ranch, they could see the imposing structure in the distance. It was a sprawling complex, surrounded by a high fence and guarded by armed men. The main house was a two-story mansion, built of stone and timber, a testament to Jebediah's wealth and power. The closer they got, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air seemed to crackle with tension, the silence broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the occasional call of a distant bird. Silas pointed to a cluster of buildings near the main house. "That's where the bunkhouse is," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Most of Jebediah's men will be sleeping there during the day. They usually start drinking around noon." Two Feathers pointed to a narrow path leading into the hills behind the ranch. "There's another way in," he said, "a secret trail that Jebediah uses to smuggle goods. It is dangerous, but it will allow us to approach the ranch unseen." Cole nodded. "That's our best bet," he said. "We'll take the trail." They veered off the main road and onto the narrow path. The trail wound its way through the rocky hills, climbing steadily upwards. The terrain was treacherous, filled with loose rocks and thorny bushes. But Two Feathers guided them expertly, leading them through the most difficult sections. As they neared the crest of the hill, they dismounted and approached cautiously on foot. Two Feathers crawled forward, peering over the edge of the ridge. He studied the ranch below, carefully assessing the layout and the number of guards. "There are at least 10 men guarding the ranch," he said, his voice low. "They are well-armed and watchful. This will not be easy." Cole nodded. He had expected as much. He turned to Silas. "Where is Sarah?" he asked. Silas hesitated. I don't know for sure, he said, but she usually spends her days in the house, cleaning or cooking. Jebediah keeps her locked up most of the time. Cole's fist clenched. He imagined Sarah trapped in that house, enduring Jebediah's abuse. The thought fueled his determination, strengthening his resolve. He looked at Two Feathers and Silas, his eyes filled with a fierce intensity. We go in at dusk, he said. We take them by surprise. We get Sarah out of there. Two Feathers and Silas nodded, their faces grim. They knew the risks. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but they were committed to the cause. They were ready to fight for Sarah, for her freedom, for her life. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Cole and his allies prepared for the battle ahead. They checked their guns, sharpened their knives, and steeled their nerves. The time for planning was over. The time for action had come. The fate of Sarah, and perhaps their own lives, hung in the balance. The air grew thick with anticipation as the moment of truth drew near. As darkness crept across the valley, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Cole, Two Feathers, and Silas began their descent towards the ranch. They moved like shadows, silent and unseen, using the natural cover of the terrain to their advantage. Inside the house, Sarah was preparing dinner. Jebediah was in the study, drinking whiskey and poring over ledgers. His men were in the bunkhouse, gambling and carousing, their laughter and shouts carrying on the evening breeze. Sarah moved mechanically, her face expressionless. She had learned to shut down her emotions, to become a ghost in her own life. But tonight, something felt different. A strange sense of anticipation, a flicker of hope that she couldn't explain. As she stirred the stew, she heard a faint sound outside, a twig snapping beneath a heavy foot. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that Jebediah's men were always on guard, but something about this sound felt different. It felt deliberate. She cautiously approached the window, peering out into the darkness. She couldn't see anything, but the feeling persisted. Someone was out there. Suddenly, the door to the study burst open, and Jebediah stormed into the kitchen, his face flushed with anger. "What are you staring at?" he bellowed, his voice slurred. Sarah flinched, turning away from the window. "Nothing, Mr. Stone," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jebediah grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful. "Don't lie to me," he snarled. "I saw you looking out the window. Who were you looking at?" Sarah bit her lip, refusing to answer. She knew that anything she said would only make things worse. Jebediah's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand, his face contorted with rage. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice menacing. Sarah braced herself for the blow, closing her eyes tightly. But it never came. Instead, they heard a commotion outside, a shout, a gunshot. Jebediah turned towards the sound, his expression changing from anger to confusion. "What the hell is going on out there?" he muttered, releasing Sarah's arm. He strode towards the door, pulling out his gun. "Stay here," he ordered Sarah, his eyes filled with suspicion. "And don't move." Sarah stood frozen in place, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew that something was about to change. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the sounds of the approaching chaos. As Jebediah stepped outside, Sarah cautiously approached the window again, peering out into the darkness. This time, she could see them. Figures moving swiftly and silently through the shadows, their guns drawn, their faces grim. She recognized one of them instantly. A tall, lean figure with a familiar stride. A figure she thought she would never see again. Cole. Her breath caught in her throat. He had come back for her. A wave of hope washed over her, stronger than anything she had felt in months. Maybe, just maybe, she would be free after all. But she knew that the battle had just begun, and that her survival, and Cole's, depended on what happened next. She knew she had to be ready to help, to do whatever she could to aid in her own rescue. The moment she'd been subconsciously waiting for had finally arrived. The only question was, could she survive it? The gunfight erupted with a deafening roar. Cole and Two Feathers took down the guard stationed outside the bunkhouse with swift, precise shots. Silas, knowing the layout of the ranch, led them towards the main house, taking cover behind the stables and the water trough. Jebediah, realizing he was under attack, rallied his remaining men. They poured out of the house, firing wildly in all directions. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the screams of the wounded, and the thunder of gunfire. Sarah, trapped inside the house, knew she had to do something. She couldn't just stand by and watch Cole risk his life for her. She remembered the layout of the house, the secret passages and hidden rooms that Jebediah had shown her, boasting of his cunning and his ability to escape any threat. She crept into the study, searching for a weapon. She found a small derringer hidden in a drawer, a tiny pistol that Jebediah kept for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She cautiously made her way towards the front door, peering through a crack in the wall. She saw Cole pinned down behind a wagon, exchanging gunfire with Jebediah and his men. Two Feathers was providing cover fire from the stables, while Silas was attempting to flank the house. She knew that Cole needed help. She took a deep breath, steeled her nerves, and slipped out of the house, moving quickly and silently towards the back of the stables. She planned to circle around and come up behind Jebediah's men, creating a diversion that would allow Cole to break free. As she rounded the corner of the stables, she came face to face with Jebediah. He was standing there, his eyes blazing with fury, his gun pointed directly at her. "So," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom, "you thought you could betray me, did you? You thought you could run away with that outlaw scum?" Sarah stood frozen in place, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that she was trapped. There was no escape. Jebediah took a step closer, his face contorted with rage. "I should have known," he said. "You were always too good for me, too pure. But now, you're going to pay the price." He raised his gun, preparing to fire. But before he could pull the trigger, Sarah acted instinctively. She raised the derringer and fired, the small pistol bucking in her hand. The bullet struck Jebediah in the shoulder, knocking him off balance. He roared with pain and fury, dropping his gun. Sarah didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, grabbing Jebediah's gun and pointing it at him. "Get out of here," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Leave this place and never come back." Jebediah stared at her, his eyes filled with disbelief and hatred. He had never seen Sarah like this before. He had always seen her as weak and submissive, but now she was standing before him, a woman transformed, a woman who was no longer afraid. "You'll regret this," he snarled, clutching his wounded shoulder. "You'll all regret this." He turned and stumbled away, disappearing into the darkness. Sarah watched him go, her body shaking with adrenaline. She had done it. She had finally stood up to Jebediah. But the fight was far from over. She knew that Jebediah would be back, and that he would be more dangerous than ever. She had to find Cole, and she had to help him finish this fight. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, and she was ready to do whatever it took to protect the people she cared about. Sarah, armed with Jebediah's gun, raced towards the front of the house, scanning the chaotic scene. She saw Cole pinned down, taking fire from two of Jebediah's remaining men. Two Feathers was still providing cover from the stables, but Silas was nowhere to be seen. She knew she had to act quickly. She raised Jebediah's gun and fired, taking down one of the men who was shooting at Cole. The other man turned towards her, his eyes widening in surprise. Cole used the opportunity to break cover, charging towards the remaining gunman. He tackled him to the ground, wrestling for control of the weapon. Sarah ran towards them, ready to help Cole, but as she did, she heard a shout from behind. She turned to see one of Jebediah's men, a burly brute with a scarred face, charging towards her with a knife. She tried to raise the gun, but it was too late. The man lunged at her, knocking her to the ground. The knife flashed in the moonlight, heading straight for her chest. Suddenly, a shot rang out, and the man crumpled to the ground, the knife clattering beside him. Sarah looked up to see Silas standing over her, his face pale but determined, a smoking gun in his hand. "Are you all right?" he asked, helping her to her feet. Sarah nodded, her body shaking with adrenaline. "Thank you, Silas," she said. "You saved my life." "We're not out of this yet," Silas replied, his eyes scanning the scene. "There are still more of them out there." Cole, having disarmed the remaining gunmen, joined them. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," Sarah said, "but we need to find Two Feathers. I haven't seen him in a while." They searched the area around the stables, calling out Two Feathers' name. Finally, they found him lying on the ground, his face pale, a bullet wound in his leg. "I'm all right," Two Feathers said, gritting his teeth in pain. "Just a scratch." "We need to get you out of here," Cole said, helping him to his feet. "No," Two Feathers protested. "I can still fight." "We need you to be safe," Sarah said. "We can't win this fight if we're worried about you." Cole agreed. "Silas, help me get Two Feathers to safety," he said. "I'll stay here and hold them off." Silas nodded, helping Cole to support Two Feathers. They moved towards the edge of the ranch, heading towards a nearby forest where they could find cover. Sarah watched them go, her heart filled with fear and determination. She knew that Cole was facing impossible odds, but she had faith in him. She knew that he would never give up. She turned back towards the house, grabbing Jebediah's gun. She was ready to fight, to protect the people she cared about. She was no longer a victim. She was a warrior, and she was ready to face whatever the night might bring. The final showdown was approaching, and she knew that the fate of Dust Devil Gulch and her own hung in the balance. It was time to end this, once and for all. Cole stood alone in the center of the ranch, the last remaining light of the moon casting long, eerie shadows around him. He could hear the sounds of Jebediah's men regrouping, their voices filled with anger and fear. He knew that it was only a matter of time before they came for him. Sarah, watching from the shadows, knew that she couldn't let Cole face them alone. She had to help him, even if it meant risking her own life. She crept forward, moving silently towards the main house, hoping to find a vantage point where she could provide cover fire. Suddenly, Jebediah emerged from the darkness, his face contorted with rage, a gun in each hand. He had bandaged a shoulder, but the wound was still bleeding, staining his shirt a dark crimson. "You!" he roared, his voice echoing across the ranch. "You did this to me. You ruined everything." Cole stood his ground, his face expressionless. "You brought this on yourself, Jebediah," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You terrorized this town. You abused Sarah. You had it coming." Jebediah laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you can stop me? You think you could take what's mine? You're wrong. This is my town, my land, and I'm not going to let you take it away from me." He raised his guns, preparing to fire. Cole did the same, his eyes fixed on Jebediah's. Sarah, watching from the shadows, knew that this was it, the final showdown. She raised Jebediah's gun, aiming it at Jebediah's back, ready to fire if Cole needed her help. But Cole didn't need her help. He was a gunslinger, a survivor. He had faced death countless times, and he wasn't afraid to face it again. The two men stood facing each other, their eyes locked in a deadly stare. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Jebediah made his move. He fired both guns, the bullets whistling through the air. Cole reacted instantly, dodging the bullets with lightning-fast reflexes. He returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. One bullet struck Jebediah in the chest, sending him staggering backwards. The other bullet grazed his head, sending blood streaming down his face. Jebediah roared with pain and fury, firing again and again. But Cole was too fast, too skilled. He dodged the bullets, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Finally, with a deafening roar, Cole fired the final shot. The bullet struck Jebediah in the heart, sending him crashing to the ground. Jebediah lay motionless, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. The reign of terror was over. Cole stood over him, his chest heaving, his gun still smoking. He had done it. He had defeated Jebediah Stone. He had saved Sarah. Sarah emerged from the shadows, running towards Cole. She threw her arms around him. "You came back," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Cole held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. "I promised I would," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The remaining members of Jebediah's gang, seeing their leader defeated, scattered into the darkness, abandoning the ranch. The reign of terror was truly over. Silas and Two Feathers returned, their faces etched with relief. They had managed to find a safe place for Two Feathers to recover, and they were eager to see if Cole and Sarah were all right. "It's over," Cole said, looking at his friends. "It's finally over." The dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. The ranch, once a symbol of Jebediah's power, was now a scene of devastation. But amidst the wreckage, there was a sense of hope, a feeling that something new was about to begin. The townsfolk of Dust Devil Gulch, hearing the news of Jebediah's death, emerged from their homes, their faces filled with joy and gratitude. They gathered at the ranch, celebrating their newfound freedom. Sarah looked at Cole, her eyes filled with questions. "What happens now?" she asked. "What are we going to do?" Cole smiled, taking her hand in his. "I don't know," he said, "but whatever we do, we'll do it together." He knew that his past would always haunt him, that he could never truly escape the life of an outlaw. But he also knew that he had found something worth fighting for, something worth living for. He had found Sarah. Sarah looked at the town, at the people who had suffered so much under Jebediah's rule. She knew that they needed help, that they needed someone to lead them, to guide them toward a better future. "I think I want to stay here," she said, her voice firm. "I want to help these people rebuild their lives." Cole nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "We'll stay here, and we'll help them. We'll build a new life together, a life filled with hope and